The envelope sat unopened on the counter for 2 days. Elena Brooks stared at it now, her hand hovering just above the white paper like it might burn her. It wasn't thick, not heavy, just a few folded pages inside, but she knew it carried more weight than anything she'd ever held. Her name was written in fine, looping script. That alone made her wary. No one in her world had handwriting like that. It was elegant, old money, the kind that didn't say please. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the soft tick of the wall clock. Afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains, casting thin golden lines across the tile floor. Granny Ruth was resting in her bedroom, and the house felt too still, like it was waiting. Elena finally broke the silence. "What did you do, Daddy?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, as if saying it too loud would make it more true. She peeled the envelope open slowly, reading each word with careful disbelief. Her father, Marcus Brooks, once a respected church deacon, now a shadow of that man, had offered her hand in marriage. Not with sentiment, not with care, but as payment. To settle a debt, and the man she was to marry, Grant Whitmore. That name had its own gravity in Savannah. The Whitmores owned half the buildings downtown and most of the coastline real estate. They had a foundation, a family crest, and streets named after them. They were money, old, polished, and proud. Elena had seen Grant once in a photo online, grinning with a bourbon glass in his hand, collar open, charm leaking from every smirk, a trust fund storm in designer shoes. Now he was to be her husband. Elena closed the letter and stood still, grounding herself in the cold kitchen tile. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She'd used up most of that a long time ago. The only thing left was resolve, the stubborn kind that Southern women carried through droughts and funerals and too many empty promises. That night, Granny Ruth stirred her tea slowly at the table. "You look tired, baby." "I'm fine. You always say that." Elena sat across from her, hands in her lap. She studied the fading creases on her grandmother's face, the way her eyes were still so clear. Granny Ruth had carried this family for years. When Elena's mother died, it was Granny who raised her, who kept the house clean and the fridge stocked with casseroles and tough love. And now, with medical bills rising faster than their income, her strength was running out. "I got a letter," Elena said finally. Granny's spoon stopped mid-stir. "What kind of letter?" "A business offer." "From the Whitmores." Granny didn't speak. Her silence was loud and full. "They want me to marry Grant." Her grandmother's lips pressed into a thin line, as if the truth tasted sour. "Why?" "To forgive Daddy's debt, for the hospital bills." Granny sat back in her chair, slow and deliberate. Her eyes didn't widen. They hardened. "Your father promised me he wouldn't touch your future to fix his mess." Elena looked down. "Promises haven't kept this roof over our heads." There was a pause. Long, heavy, the kind that made a person older. "Do you want this?" Granny asked softly. "No." "Then why are you considering it?" "Because it's not about want. It's about need." Granny leaned forward, her fingers wrapping around Elena's. "You're not some pawn, baby. Don't let them trade you like one." "I'm not," Elena said quietly, "but I am choosing. I'm choosing to save you." The words hung in the air like thick perfume, sweet and hard to breathe through. 3 days later, she stood in front of Whitmore Manor. The house was less a home and more a declaration. White columns, iron gates, manicured hedges shaped like angels, every corner whispered wealth. It looked like something out of a movie, one where the poor girl gets swallowed whole. Julia Whitmore opened the door. Petite, Sharp-eyed and soft-spoken, she gave Elena a polite smile. "You must be Elena." "I must be. I'm Julia, Grant's sister." "Welcome to the zoo." That earned a small laugh from Elena, which felt like a tiny rebellion. Inside, the house was all quiet opulence. Crystal vases, hardwood floors that didn't creak, and paintings of dead men with hollow eyes. "Grant's in the study," Julia said, leading her through the grand hallway. "He's not good with new things or responsibility." "Perfect," Elena murmured. Julia smirked. "But I like you already." When they reached the study, Julia paused at the door. "Good luck," she said, and disappeared. Elena stepped in. Grant Whitmore sat behind a walnut desk, flipping through a leather-bound journal. He looked exactly like the photos, tall, charming, too confident. But there was something else in person. Something quieter in his eyes. He didn't look up. "You came. You sent for me." He closed the journal and finally met her gaze. His smile was quick, practiced. "Well, you're not what I expected." "I hear that a lot." They stared at each other, measuring, trying to read between posture and silence. "This isn't a love story, you know," Grant said, his voice dry. "You're not here to change me." "I'm not here for you at all." That made his brow rise. "Then why are you here?" She stepped forward, slow, steady. "Because my grandmother needs care. Because my father made a deal I didn't agree to. And because walking away doesn't fix a single thing." Grant studied her for a long moment. "You're blunt. You're rich." A pause. Then he laughed, a low, surprised chuckle. "You're not afraid of me." "I've dealt with scarier things than a spoiled millionaire." He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing with interest. "This might be more entertaining than I thought." Elena didn't smile. "This isn't entertainment for me. It's survival. So let's skip the game and sign whatever we need to sign." His amusement faded just a touch. "You're serious?" "I am." He nodded slowly. "All right. Let's get married, Miss Brooks." "No," she said, voice even. "Let's get this over with, Mr. Whitmore." And for the first time in his charmed life, Grant didn't have a clever response. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The wedding wasn't a wedding. It was a signature on a document, a quiet handshake, and an awkward photo taken by Grant's lawyer in a marble-floored office that smelled faintly of cigar smoke and antique books. No music. No vows, no guests. Just two people sitting side by side in clothes too formal for how little emotion filled the room. Elena wore a cream-colored dress, simple, elegant. Chosen by Julia, not her. Grant wore a tailored navy suit and a watch that probably cost more than Elena's student debt. When they signed the marriage license, neither of them looked at the other. A flick of the pen. Done. "You're officially a Whitmore," Grant said under his breath, not quite looking at her. Elena closed the pen. "Is that supposed to sound like a reward?" The car ride to the estate was silent. Rain tapped gently against the windows as Savannah blurred by. Moss-covered oaks, gas-lit street lamps, brick sidewalks. All so lovely. All so far from what her life had been just days ago. At the gate, Elena glanced out the window as they pulled into the Whitmore property. It wasn't just a home. It was a world. A sprawling colonial mansion with ivy climbing its stone pillars, wraparound porches, and a circular driveway with a fountain in the center. Water dancing over a marble lion's head. The driver parked. Grant didn't move. "You sure you want to go through that front door?" Elena looked over. We're already inside the gate. He gave a tired half-smile and stepped out. Elena followed. Inside, the foyer stretched upward like a cathedral. White marble floors, crystal chandelier, double staircase curling to the second floor. A woman in a fitted gray dress stood by the base of the stairs, tablet in hand, posture so straight it seemed unnatural. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, nodding at Elena with a tight smile. "I'm Madeline, house coordinator." Coordinator, not housekeeper. Elena noted the phrasing. Madeline turned to Grant. "Your father is in the sunroom. He asked to speak with you once you arrived." Grant gave her a brief nod. "Tell him I'll be down in a minute." He turned to Elena. "Let's get you settled." They walked down a long hallway, their footsteps echoing against polished floors. Portraits lined the walls, Whitmores from generations past. Elena paused in front of one, a woman in a blue gown, seated at a grand piano, her eyes distant. She was the last woman who married into this family, Grant said behind her. "She lasted 4 years. What happened?" "She left." "Why?" Grant met her eyes. "Because she couldn't tell if the walls were keeping her safe or trapping her." He opened a door near the end of the hallway. "This is your room." Elena stepped in. The room was massive. Bay windows overlooked the back gardens. A king-sized canopy bed, velvet drapes, an antique vanity, and a sitting area arranged near the fireplace. It was the kind of room people saw in magazines and thought, "What a dream." But all Elena saw was space, space between everything. Space between her and Grant. "You're not staying here?" she asked. He shook his head. "I'm 2 doors down." "Right, of course." Grant lingered in the doorway for a moment. "Listen, I'm not going to pretend we're anything we're not. You do your thing, I'll do mine. We stay out of each other's way, and we both walk away clean when the time comes." "When is that?" He shrugged. "Whenever this arrangement stops working." Elena didn't answer. He nodded once and left, closing the door behind him. She sat on the edge of the bed. Everything around her was perfect, polished, curated. But nothing felt like hers. She opened her suitcase, one bag, neatly packed, and placed a photo of Granny Ruth on the nightstand. That evening, a soft knock came at her door. "Elena?" Julia's voice. "You hungry?" Elena opened the door to find Julia holding a tray, soup, bread, and a glass of water. "I figured you hadn't eaten." Grant never remembers food on emotional days. "This doesn't feel like an emotional day." Julia gave a knowing smile. "That's because it hasn't hit yet." Elena took the tray and stepped back. Julia followed her in and sat by the window. "First night's the hardest," she said. "The silence is different here." "You'll notice that." Elena looked down at the soup. "Did your parents get married like this?" "No. My mother was in love with my father. Or at least she thought she was. She died when I was 11. "I'm sorry." Julia nodded. "I am too." "She would have liked you." They sat in silence a while before Julia stood. "Don't let this house swallow you, Elena. It's beautiful, but it's hungry." That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She walked the halls barefoot, letting the cool marble ground her. Somewhere in the distance she heard piano music, soft, unpolished. She followed it down the hall to a room with French doors cracked slightly open. Inside, Grant sat at a baby grand piano, his back to her, slowly pressing the keys like he wasn't sure he remembered how. A drink sat untouched on the table beside him. "You play?" she asked. He jumped slightly but didn't turn around. "Not well. It sounded like something." He glanced over his shoulder. "Couldn't sleep?" No. They looked at each other for a moment, the kind where no one speaks because silence is doing more work. I used to play when I was younger, he said finally, before everything got too loud. Elena leaned against the doorway. Then maybe you should keep playing. Grant returned to the keys but didn't touch them again. Just sat there, staring at the black and white, like he was trying to remember what he used to love. I didn't ask for this, you know, he said without looking up. Neither did I. He gave a small, tired laugh. Perfect. We agree on something. She left him there, the notes unfinished. And when she finally went back to her room, the house didn't feel as silent. But it didn't feel like home either. Not yet. Morning sunlight spilled across the floor of Elena's bedroom, golden and warm, but it didn't reach her. She stood at the tall window overlooking the back gardens, wrapped in the robe Julia had left on her door last night. Her suitcase still sat untouched by the armoire. She hadn't unpacked. Not yet. Something about emptying it felt too final, like she was admitting she belonged here. There was a knock on the door, soft and rhythmic. Elena? Julia's voice again, like clockwork, gentle, aware. I made breakfast. Elena opened the door slowly. Julia wore linen slacks and a tucked-in blouse, her long hair tied back in a scarf that matched her shoes. Even her casual felt curated. She held 2 mugs of coffee. I didn't know how you'd take it, so I guessed, she said, offering one. Elena took it with a small nod. Thank you. Grant left early, Julia added, walking into the room uninvited but not unkind. Business meeting with his father. Those are always a treat. Elena raised an eyebrow. I thought he didn't do business. He doesn't, but his father insists. Thinks a wife will finally anchor him. His father doesn't know me. Julia turned, her eyes gentle but knowing. He doesn't care. To him, you're the ribbon on a reputation rehab. There was no venom in her tone. Just fact. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, cradling the coffee between her palms. I don't even know how to exist here. You don't have to know, Julia said, settling beside her. You just have to survive long enough to choose what kind of life you want when this chapter's over. They were quiet for a beat. Then Julia's phone buzzed. She glanced down, sighed. Well, she said, standing, Bianca's back in town. Elena looked up. Bianca? Julia nodded slowly. She and Grant have history, and she doesn't like being replaced. I'm not replacing anyone, Elena said, confused. Julia tilted her head. That won't matter to her. That afternoon, Elena wandered the halls alone. The estate was quiet, too quiet. Even with the sound of the wind whispering through the hedges outside, the house felt like it was holding its breath. She found herself in the library, an oversized room with arched windows and floor-to-ceiling shelves. Dust hung in the air, golden where the sun caught it. She ran her hand along the spine of a book titled Legacy and Law. Half the titles looked untouched. A framed photo on the far shelf caught her attention. It was Grant, maybe 17, standing beside a woman with striking eyes and soft features. His mother. The smile he wore in the photo wasn't like the smirks he gave now. It was real. Unfiltered, like someone who hadn't yet learned to guard his happiness. She turned when she heard a voice behind her. I didn't think anyone actually came in here. Grant leaned against the doorframe, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked like he hadn't slept well. The collar of his shirt was slightly askew. I was curious, Elena said simply. He stepped into the room, glancing around. This used to be her favorite place. My mom. She'd sit in that chair near the window with her tea and a mystery novel, and pretend the world wasn't trying to make her into something she didn't want to be. Elena watched his face soften as he spoke. What did she want to be? She asked. Free. A pause stretched between them. He reached for the same photo she'd just looked at, brushing dust from the frame. She married my father for love. But love here, it dries out, like a pond with no rain. Eventually, you don't even know what you were thirsty for in the first place. Elena sat down on the velvet reading chair, the leather soft beneath her hands. That's why you don't want this. Marriage. He didn't answer at first, then, marriage isn't the problem. Pretending it's something it's not, that's the part I hate. She looked at him, measured him. What if it doesn't have to be pretend? His eyes met hers, sharp, searching. Elena, he said slowly, you don't owe me hope. I'm not offering hope, she said quietly. I'm offering honesty. If we're going to be stuck in this house wearing rings neither of us picked, the least we can do is stop performing. Grant didn't move. Then, almost without thinking, he pulled the chair from across the room and sat facing her. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't either. Their eyes held, unblinking, the room still around them. Then, the sound of heels clicking on tile broke the moment. Elena, Madeline said from the doorway. You have a visitor. Elena blinked. A visitor? She didn't give her name. But she said she's a close acquaintance of your husband. Grant stood up immediately. His jaw tightened. She's here? Madeline gave a tight nod. In the foyer. Grant muttered something under his breath and walked out, fast. Elena followed. Bianca Cross stood in the grand entranceway like she belonged there, tall, flawless, wrapped in a sleeveless black dress that clung in all the right places. Her hair cascaded in soft waves, and a gold watch sparkled on her wrist as she casually adjusted her purse strap. Elena, she said smoothly, without waiting for an introduction. You're prettier than I expected. Elena stopped a few feet away. You have me at a disadvantage. I don't know who you are. Bianca smiled, slow and sharp. That's cute. I'm Bianca. Grant's, well, let's just say I was around before the paperwork. Grant stepped between them then, voice low but firm. Bianca, you need to leave. Oh, I will, she said, eyes still locked on Elena. I just wanted to see the girl who said yes. Elena didn't flinch. I said yes to saving my family. Not to competing with anyone. Bianca laughed, a polished sound. Good luck, sweetheart. Grant loves a challenge. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving a trace of expensive perfume in the air. Elena stood frozen, the moment simmering inside her. Grant exhaled slowly, dragging a hand through his hair. I'm sorry, he said. She wasn't supposed to show up like that. Is that who you wanted before all this? Elena asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. I don't know who I wanted, he said honestly. But I know who I need to be now. Elena looked at him, eyes steady. Then I hope you start becoming him. And she walked back to her room, shoulders squared, heartbeat loud, the smell of jasmine and judgment still clinging to the air. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The next morning arrived with overcast skies and the scent of rain soaking into the old magnolia trees that lined the Whitmore estate. Elena sat at the breakfast table alone, stirring cream into her coffee as the grandfather clock ticked behind her with slow, deliberate clicks. The dining room, as grand as it was, felt cavernous without sound. Too much space between chairs, between moments. She didn't know if Grant had already eaten, or if he even planned to. No one said anything. The staff floated in and out like ghosts, respectful, silent, trained to avoid eye contact unless spoken to. Julia walked in barefoot, holding her phone and wearing a silk robe with messy hair tied up in a loose knot. She smiled softly. "You survived, Bianca. That's worth at least a cinnamon roll." "I don't think she was here for conversation," Elena said, keeping her tone level. "She never is." Julia poured herself orange juice and sat beside Elena, stretching out with ease. She's been circling since Grant turned 25. Never really left. She has this theory that Whitmores don't fall in love. They just get bored. And she assumes I'm the latest distraction. Julia looked over the rim of her glass. "She assumes you're temporary." "It's how she keeps herself safe." Elena didn't answer. The front doorbell rang. Twice. Julia frowned, setting her glass down. "That's not a Whitmore knock." Madeline appeared a moment later. "Elena, your sister is here." Elena stiffened. "Fallon?" She didn't give a name, but she said, and I quote, "Tell her family came to check if she's still pretending to live like a queen." Julia blinked. Wow. Elena stood slowly. Her hand brushed the table, grounding herself. "Let her in." Fallon Brooks swept in like a breeze full of perfume and passive judgment. Tall, poised, dressed in coral and beige. Her heels clicked across the marble floor like punctuation. Her hair was perfectly curled. Her tone was not. "Well, this is more than I expected," Fallon said, turning in a slow circle to admire the foyer. "Why are you here?" Elena asked, voice calm. Fallon smiled. "Is that how a sister welcomes family?" "We haven't been family in a long time." Julia stayed seated, observing with quiet amusement. "I just wanted to see how you were adjusting," Fallon continued, "and maybe get a tour. I've never seen the inside of a Whitmore home. They usually don't invite people like us." Elena's jaw tightened. "Then maybe you should have stayed home." "Don't be so cold," Fallon said, stepping closer. "I was surprised, that they picked you. After everything. You were always the quiet one. The one with second-hand shoes and those little notebooks full of dreams." She leaned in, her voice dipping. "I thought if anyone married into money, it would be me." "You still can," Elena said simply. "Grant has cousins." Julia nearly choked on her juice. Fallon tilted her head. "You've changed." "I've adjusted." "To what?" "Pretending to be a wife? Or pretending he's not still hung up on his ex?" Elena didn't flinch. "This isn't a performance, Fallon. I'm not here for applause." Fallon's eyes flicked toward Julia. "Is she always like this now? So polished?" Julia smiled, sweet and unreadable. "You should see her when she's reading contracts. It's inspiring." "I'd love to stay for dinner," Fallon said suddenly. "Reacquaint with the family. Get to know your new world." "You're not invited," Elena said. "Oh, come on. One meal." "I came all this way." Elena hesitated. Her instinct said no. Her pride whispered yes. "Fine, one dinner." Later that evening, as Elena dressed in her room, she felt the air tighten around her. Fallon's presence stirred something old in her, something raw. Memories of competing for affection, being overlooked, being told to wait her turn. She stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair back and applying a soft pink tint to her lips. Not for Fallon, not for Grant. For herself. She didn't want to look like she belonged in the room. She wanted to feel like she chose to be there. Downstairs, the dining table had been set formally. Crystal glasses, gold-rimmed plates, linen napkins folded into tight triangles. The staff moved like clockwork, placing dishes as Grant entered in a dark green button-down and slacks. He looked up when he saw Elena. His eyes caught for a moment, and something unreadable passed between them. Admiration, maybe. Surprise. Fallon was already seated, sipping wine like she'd done it 1,000 times. "Grant," she purred. "Long time. Didn't expect to see you looking so tame." "I've learned the value of quiet," he replied coolly, sitting across from her. The meal was southern, but elevated. Grilled sea bass, lemon collards, herb rice, cornbread with honey butter. Fallon complimented everything, but every word was laced in condescension. "So, Elena," Fallon said, swirling her glass, "what do you do all day in this place? Read?" "Nap? Practice being someone else? I breathe," Elena said calmly. "It's refreshing." Julia stifled a laugh. Grant leaned back in his chair, watching closely. "Do you love him?" Fallon asked suddenly, her eyes sharp. The room stilled. Elena looked across the table at Grant. "I respect him," she said, "and that's a better place to start than most people have." Grant's hand twitched slightly, then reached for his water. Fallon smirked. "That's not an answer. It wasn't your question to ask." Silence wrapped the room. After dinner, as the dishes were cleared, Fallon lingered in the hallway, pretending to admire a vase. "You're playing a long game," she whispered to Elena. "But careful, sister. Games always end." Elena stepped closer, her voice soft and solid. "This isn't a game. It's a life. One I'm choosing to live, not borrow." Fallon's smile faltered for the first time all night. Grant walked up behind them, glass in hand. "Everything all right here?" Elena nodded. "Yes." Fallon was just leaving. Fallon gave a brittle laugh and stepped toward the door. "Well, it's been enlightening." She left without another word. Elena stood still for a moment, then turned toward Grant. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not pretending." He held her gaze. "I don't want to." She walked past him, up the stairs slowly, letting the silence between them settle like dust in sunlight. Real, quiet, unresolved. But not empty. Not anymore. Rain patted gently against the window panes as evening settled over Whitmore Manor. The storm had come in slow and steady. A southern drizzle that soaked the garden paths and turned the sky a bruised shade of gray. Elena stood by the window in the drawing room, one hand wrapped around a warm mug of chamomile tea, the other tucked close to her chest. The room was dim, lit only by a single floor lamp and the flickering fireplace. Shadows moved across the walls like whispers she couldn't hear. She hadn't seen Grant all day. After Fallon's visit, things had shifted again. Not backward exactly, but sideways. Grant had been more present since their talk after Bianca, but still distant in ways that felt practiced, like he knew how to be polite, but hadn't yet figured out how to be real. She turned at the sound of a soft knock. Julia peeked in, already wrapped in her oversized cardigan. "Do you have a minute?" Julia asked, her voice low. "Always," Elena replied. Julia stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her. She carried a small wooden box in her hands, worn at the corners, carved with vines and initials Elena couldn't make out. "I thought you should see this," she said, setting it down on the nearby table. "It was our mother's. Grant hasn't touched it since she passed. I think maybe it's time someone did." Elena hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside were a few small things. An old lace handkerchief, a broken fountain pen, a yellowed envelope. Beneath those, a photograph of a younger Charles Whitmore and his wife, sitting on the front steps of the house, their hands loosely entwined. There was something honest in the way her head leaned toward him, a softness in his eyes that Elena hadn't yet seen in the man himself. She used to write letters, Julia said, her voice quiet, but not to people. To herself. She said it helped her understand how she really felt. Elena looked up. Why are you showing me this? Because you're in this house now. And I can see it's weighing on you. The silence. The history. The expectations. Julia took a breath. And because I think Grant notices more than he admits. Elena closed the box gently and leaned back in her chair. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a role I didn't audition for. You're not alone, Julia said softly. This house has made performers out of all of us. That night, unable to sleep, Elena walked through the quiet halls and found herself outside the study. The door was ajar, the light inside still on. She paused, then gently pushed it open. Grant sat behind the desk, sleeves rolled up, tie undone, papers scattered around him. A small record played softly in the corner, jazz from another era. He looked up when she entered, not startled, just aware. "You're working late," she said. He leaned back in his chair, trying to make sense of things my father keeps pretending are simple. Elena stepped inside. "Like what?" He held up a sheet. "Zoning applications for the Westbrook project. He wants to tear down 3 historical homes and replace them with townhouses." I said no. He said I don't understand the business. She took the paper from his hand and scanned it. "Those homes are protected under the Preservation Act, aren't they?" He looked at her, eyebrows raised. "You know about that?" "I took a law elective last year, focused on urban development." Grant tilted his head, intrigued. "You really are full of surprises." She handed the paper back. "Maybe you should fight for something your mother would have wanted saved." Grant leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You think she'd care?" "I think she'd want someone to." The air shifted between them. Quieter. Closer. Grant gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit. If you're going to question me like this, you might as well be comfortable." Elena sat down slowly, folding her hands in her lap. He studied her for a moment. "Why haven't you unpacked?" The question caught her off guard. "You noticed?" "I notice more than people think." She looked down. "Because I don't know if I live here, or if I'm just visiting a long chapter in someone else's story." He nodded slowly, tapping a pen against his palm. "I get that." "I'm trying," she added, her voice softer now. "But I don't know what I'm trying to build, or who I'm building it with." Grant's gaze dropped to the desk. "That makes 2 of us." They sat in the pause. Then he reached across the desk, picked up a small silver paperweight shaped like a magnolia flower, and turned it in his fingers. "My mother planted one outside my bedroom window when I was a kid," he said. "Said it would remind me to grow toward the light." Elena smiled faintly. "Smart woman." "Too smart," he replied. "Maybe that's why this house never felt right after she was gone." "Do you think it can feel right again?" she asked, almost afraid of his answer. He met her eyes. "I think it could, if I stop trying to fill her place and start learning from it instead." A beat. "I think you'd have liked her," he added. "And I think she would have liked you." Elena looked down at her hands, at the wedding ring that still felt foreign on her finger. "I'd like to believe that." He stood then slowly and walked around the desk. Not close, just near enough that the energy shifted between them again. "You didn't choose this," he said quietly, But you're choosing to be kind, to listen, to care about things that aren't yours. That's more than I expected. I'm not here to decorate your image, Grant. I know. His voice dropped slightly, unsure. But maybe you're here to help me find my own. Elena stood too, unsure of what to say next. The silence between them wasn't empty now. It pulsed with something unspoken. I should get to bed, she said, voice soft. Grant nodded. Yeah, me too. She turned toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, she said over her shoulder, I don't think this place is broken. I think it's waiting for someone to stop pretending it has to be perfect. She walked out, her bare feet silent on the floor, and behind her, Grant stood still, the echo of her words settling into the quiet room like the first drops of rain hitting dry soil. The next morning, the sun finally broke through the clouds, spilling light across the Whitmore gardens like a quiet promise. Elena stood by the breakfast nook, coffee in hand, watching the way the ivy shimmered on the trellises outside. The storm had passed, but something else lingered in the air, an unspoken shift she couldn't quite name. She didn't hear Grant walk in until the floor creaked beneath his step. You always up this early? He asked, still barefoot, hair slightly tousled, like he'd barely slept. I like quiet mornings, Elena said. They don't ask much of you. He poured himself coffee, leaned against the counter. You said something last night about this place not needing to be perfect. Elena turned toward him. I meant it. Yeah, he said, eyes down. That stuck with me. Before either could say more, Madeline entered, her voice clipped and professional. Mr. Whitmore, your father has requested your presence at the club this afternoon. He says it's urgent. Grant exhaled through his nose. Of course he did. Madeline turned to Elena. There's also a delivery for you. I've left it in the solarium. Elena raised an eyebrow. A delivery? Madeline didn't offer more and disappeared down the hall like she always did. Efficient, unreadable. Elena excused herself, heading toward the sun-drenched solarium. It was a room she'd only visited once, filled with orchids and lemon trees, glass walls catching the light like stained crystal. And in the center, sitting on a cushioned bench, was a basket, hand-woven. Familiar. She stepped closer. Inside were fresh garden vegetables, a jar of honey, and a handwritten note tucked beneath a folded quilt. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. My sweet girl, I may not understand the world you're in now, but I want you to have a piece of home with you. You were born with quiet strength. Elena. Don't let the walls of someone else's life muffle your own voice. Love always, Granny Ruth. Elena's eyes stung. She pulled the quilt into her arms, faded, soft, carrying the scent of old lavender and sun-dried cotton. For a moment she sat on the bench, holding the letter to her chest, letting herself feel everything. Gratitude. Ach, the longing for something simple in the middle of so much polished complexity. Later that afternoon, she found herself wandering the East Wing, a part of the estate she hadn't fully explored. The ceilings were slightly lower here, the light softer. It felt like a part of the house people forgot existed. One door was slightly ajar. Inside, the room was filled with sketches, pinned to corkboards, taped to the walls, blueprints, concept designs, hand-drawn renderings of houses, buildings, schools, some marked up with red notes, others half-finished. She stepped in carefully, almost reverently. This was hers, Grant said behind her. Elena turned. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching her with something close to caution. My mom's design room, he continued. She studied architecture. Everyone thinks my dad was the only one with vision, but she's the reason people remember the houses we built. Elena looked around, taking in the lines, the details, the emotion hidden in structure. They're beautiful. She used to bring me here when I was a kid, Grant said, his voice quieter now. Said design wasn't about walls. It was about what you wanted people to feel inside them. Elena turned back to him. And what do you want people to feel in yours? He hesitated. Safe. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. She stepped closer, brushing her fingers along the edge of a sketch of a schoolhouse. Why haven't you touched any of this? Because I didn't think I had the right to carry her vision forward. Maybe it's not about carrying her vision, Elena said gently. Maybe it's about starting your own, with her spirit still in the room. He looked at her, something raw flickering in his expression. You're different, he said. You don't try to fix things, but somehow you make them feel less broken. Before Elena could reply, the sound of approaching heels echoed down the hallway. Julia appeared, slightly out of breath. Grant, she said. You're going to want to hear this. He frowned. What now? Julia handed him her phone. Bianca just gave an interview. Grant's brows furrowed as he tapped the screen. The video played. Bianca on a set somewhere upscale, her voice composed but full of suggestion. All I'll say, she said to the camera, is that sometimes people marry for image, not love. And those marriages don't last. Elena felt her stomach twist. Grant clenched his jaw, lowering the phone. She knows exactly what she's doing. She wants to start a story before you can tell yours, Julia said. He looked at Elena. You don't have to respond to this. I'll handle it. Elena shook her head. We can't live like ghosts in someone else's narrative. If we don't speak for ourselves, someone else always will. That night, as the sun dipped low and turned the estate gold, Elena stepped out onto the front porch, phone in hand, and typed a caption beneath a photo of the quilt Granny Ruth had sent. The caption read, "Sometimes home isn't a place. It's the people who send pieces of themselves to remind you who you are. My marriage wasn't built for show, but I'm learning how to make it real, one honest step at a time." She hit post. Then she exhaled. Inside, Grant watched from the window, her silhouette outlined in fading light, wrapped in something that felt like truth. And for the first time, he didn't feel the need to speak. He just stood there, watching, quietly wondering when exactly the house had started to feel less like his and more like theirs. The sound of silverware tapping gently against fine china filled the dining room, but it couldn't cover the silence. Not tonight. Not with the new tension floating in the air, dressed up as politeness. Charles Whitmore sat at the head of the table, fork poised, gaze sharp. His presence didn't fill the room, it pressed down on it. Across from him, Grant cut into his grilled trout but hadn't taken a bite. Elena sat to his right, posture composed, her napkin folded neatly on her lap. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears, could sense the weight of what Charles hadn't said yet. The invitation to dinner had been unexpected, formal. The kind of thing people did before offering advice that wasn't really a suggestion. "Elena," Charles said finally, dabbing his mouth with a cloth napkin, "your social media post earlier today, was that necessary?" She didn't flinch. "Yes." His eyebrow twitched. "There's a reason this family stays private. Public sympathy is fleeting. Reputation is enduring." Grant looked up, voice calm. She was correcting a narrative someone else tried to spin. Charles turned to his son. "And do you believe it was her place to do that?" "I believe it was her right." Charles leaned back, gaze fixed. "Then I suppose we've redefined what it means to be a Whitmore." Elena placed her fork down. "I didn't marry into this family to follow its rules. I'm not trying to be a Whitmore. I'm just trying to be honest." The table went still. Julia, seated beside Elena, cleared her throat gently. "I thought it was graceful." Charles gave her a look that silenced any further support. "Public perception," he said coldly, "has no room for emotion." "Then maybe the problem," Elena said, meeting his eyes, "isn't perception. It's that people have learned how to hide instead of lead." Grant's expression changed subtly. Something like pride tugged at the corner of his mouth. Charles said nothing. He just returned to his meal, slowly, as if the conversation had ended. But it hadn't, not really. That night, as Elena stepped out into the garden for air, Grant followed. He found her sitting near the fountain, fingers tracing the rim of the stone, water gliding quietly beneath her. He didn't speak right away. "You didn't have to defend me," Elena said without looking up. "I wasn't defending you," Grant replied. "I was agreeing with you." She smiled faintly. "That's dangerous in this family." He sat beside her, elbows on his knees. "Everything about this family is political, but you—" He looked at her, really looked. "You bring something none of us have figured out how to fake." She tilted her head. "What's that?" "Sincerity." The word landed softly, but it hit hard. They sat in the silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Then Grant leaned back against the bench, eyes toward the sky. "My dad doesn't believe in second chances. He thinks weakness ruins legacy." Elena turned toward him. "Do you?" He hesitated. "I used to. Until you moved in." A light breeze moved through the garden, rustling the hedges. Elena's voice was soft. "I don't know what this is, Grant." "Us? This marriage. Some days it feels like a play we keep rewriting mid-scene." He didn't respond immediately. Then quietly, "I know." Elena looked down. "But the hardest part isn't pretending. It's not knowing if there's even something worth building." Grant shifted toward her, voice low. "There is." Her breath caught slightly. He continued. "I don't know how to prove that yet, but I feel it every time we stop pretending. Every time you say something that cuts through all the noise." She met his eyes. Then stopped waiting. Their gazes held, steady and full. But before anything else could pass between them, footsteps approached. Madeline, as always, appeared at the edge of the path, like the wind had brought her. "Apologies." "There's someone here asking for Elena." Grant stood. "This late?" She said it was urgent. Elena followed her back inside, her stomach tightening with every step. At the foyer, a young woman waited, nervous, eyes darting. She looked barely 20. In her hand, she clutched a small envelope. "Elena Brooks?" she asked. "Yes. I'm from Cedar Hills Clinic. Your grandmother, she asked me to find you." Elena's throat tightened. "Is she all right?" "She's stable, but she asked for you." "Personally," said it couldn't wait. Grant appeared at her side. "I'll take you." She nodded, grateful. The car ride was quiet, the tires humming against the road. Elena stared out the window, heart heavy. "She means everything to you," Grant said quietly. "She raised me. When my father vanished into his own shame. When my mother's memory became a folded photograph on a shelf." He reached over, gently touching her hand where it rested on her knee. He didn't squeeze. He didn't speak. The gesture was enough. When they arrived, the clinic was quiet, dimly lit with the hush of night care. Elena walked briskly toward the room number she was given. Inside, Granny Ruth lay against pale blue sheets, her eyes fluttering open at the sound of the door. "Elena," she whispered. Elena rushed to her side, taking her hand. "I'm here." Granny Ruth smiled faintly. "You always are." Grant stood in the doorway, watching, quiet. "I had a dream," Granny Ruth said. "You were standing in a house full of glass, and no one saw you. But you were singing anyway, not loud, just enough." Elena smiled through the tears building behind her eyes. "What does that mean?" "It means you're exactly where you need to be. You just have to stop doubting your place." Elena laid her head gently on her grandmother's shoulder, and in that moment, something in her chest settled. Not because everything was fixed, but because someone who knew her soul had just reminded her it was still there. Grant stayed until visiting hours ended, never saying much. And when they drove back under the stars, Elena didn't sit on her side of the car. She leaned into the center, her shoulder brushing his. She didn't speak. And he didn't move away. The morning after the clinic visit, Elena stood in the kitchen, barefoot, robe tied loosely around her waist, staring into a simmering pot of grits. The soft bubbling matched the quiet storm brewing in her thoughts. Cooking had always helped her think, and today she needed clarity. She heard Grant enter before he said a word. His cologne drifted in first, subtle, warm, familiar now. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her without interrupting. "You didn't have to stay last night," she said without turning around. "I know," he replied, "but you did." Grant took a few steps forward. "I couldn't imagine leaving you there, not with her in that bed and your hands shaking like they were." She glanced at him then, eyes tired but soft. "She's everything good I came from." "And you're everything good that stayed," he said, almost under his breath. Elena looked back at the stove. "Don't say things you don't mean." "I'm not." The silence stretched between them. Not cold. "Just full." He stepped closer. "You made breakfast?" "I needed to do something normal. Something that doesn't require explaining." He smiled, pulling out a stool at the island. "Normal's underrated." She set 2 bowls in front of them, slicing butter into each with a gentle hand. "I don't know what this is between us," she said, voice steady, "but I'm tired of pretending it's not something." Grant didn't answer immediately. He stirred his grits, then set the spoon down. "Neither of us asked for this, but somehow this," he gestured between them, "feels more real than anything else in my life right now." Elena's eyes met his. "Then what are we doing?" "I think," he said slowly, "we're building something we didn't know we needed." They sat in that quiet confession, letting the honesty breathe. Later that day, Elena took a walk through the gardens, alone. The air was warm, thick with jasmine, and the magnolia trees were beginning to bloom again, late for the season. As she turned a corner near the stone fountain, she nearly collided with Julia, who was on her phone, pacing in small, agitated circles. "I didn't agree to that," Julia snapped into the receiver. "No, I don't care what he told you. If he wanted my signature, he should have asked for it himself." She saw Elena and waved apologetically. "I'll call you back." Elena tilted her head. "Everything okay?" Julia sighed. "My father's trying to leverage part of my trust fund for a Whitmore Foundation gala next month. Claims it'll benefit the family name. Translation: he wants me to play the Grateful Daughter again." Elena walked with her toward the shaded pergola. "Are you going to?" "I haven't decided," Julia said. But it got me thinking. If he's planning that gala, he'll expect you and Grant to play the golden couple. Elena stopped walking. We're barely even a couple. Exactly, Julia said, eyebrow raised. That's why he wants the gala. To parade you both, quiet the gossip, reset the narrative. And what if we don't show? Then the whispers get louder and your seat at the table gets smaller. Elena looked down at her hands. She still wasn't used to the ring. It spun slightly when she wasn't paying attention. Maybe it's time I stop waiting for a seat and start building my own table. Julia smiled. That's why I like you. Back inside, Elena found Grant in the study, flipping through a manila folder thick with legal printouts. You're working on the foundation files? She asked, stepping in. He nodded. Trying to rework the zoning for that Westbrook project. I think I found a way to save the old homes and still add housing. She smiled faintly. You sound hopeful. He looked up. That's your fault. She leaned against the doorframe. Julia told me about the gala. He sighed. Of course she did. They expect us to play pretend again. Grant closed the folder. Do you want to? I don't want to perform, but I'm not afraid to be seen anymore. He stood and crossed to her. Then let's show them what we are, not what they expect. Elena searched his face. And what are we, Grant? He was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, we're two people who started out as strangers, and somewhere along the way, started telling the truth. That night, Elena visited Granny Ruth again. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and chamomile lotion. Her grandmother was more alert this time, her voice stronger. You look different, she said, smiling. Elena sat beside her, holding her hand. I feel different. You carry less weight on your face. That man, he's softening something in you. He's learning how to see me, not just look at me. Granny Ruth squeezed her hand. That's the start of love, baby. Not the roses, not the grand gestures, the seeing. Elena rested her head gently against her grandmother's shoulder. I just want to be something real in a world that runs on pretend. You already are, Granny Ruth whispered. You just have to keep choosing it. When Elena returned home that evening, she found Grant in the solarium, sitting beneath the soft orange glow of the pendant lights. He was sketching. A new design, a single-story community clinic with wide hallways, glass rooms, and a wraparound porch. For you, he said, holding the page out. Or maybe for us. She looked at the lines, the flow of it. It looks like hope, she whispered. Grant nodded. It's built into the foundation. And without another word, she sat beside him, their shoulders touching, the quiet between them no longer empty, but full of something new, something theirs. The next morning, the Whitmore estate felt unusually alive. Sunlight warmed the kitchen tiles. The garden doors were open, and the scent of honeysuckle drifted in on a breeze. Elena stood at the counter, chopping strawberries, while Grant sat across from her with a laptop open and a half-eaten piece of toast in hand. So, what do you think? He asked, tapping the screen toward her. About the name? She leaned over. The Ruth Whitmore Community Clinic sat proudly in the center of the mock-up, nestled in bold serif letters just above a sunlit rendering of the building he'd shown her the night before. She blinked. You named it after my grandmother? Grant shrugged, a little sheepish. She's the reason we're even talking about this. Seemed right. Elena set the knife down, heart catching in her throat. She'd cry if she saw this. Good, he said gently. She deserves that kind of legacy. The moment stretched, weighty with meaning. But before either could say more, the sound of heels echoed in the hallway. Julia poked her head into the kitchen, phone in hand. "You two might want to see this." Grant's face tensed. "What now?" Julia handed Elena the phone. A video was playing, Bianca again, this time seated at a brunch panel, speaking with syrupy calm. "I just think it's sweet," Bianca was saying, "that some women think proximity to power is the same as being powerful. It's quaint." The audience laughed politely. "And Grant?" Bianca continued. "He's always been generous with his time, but that doesn't make a wedding real, not when it's born out of business." Elena locked eyes with Julia, jaw tightening. "She knows what she's doing," Julia said. "She's baiting you." Elena passed the phone back. "I'm not biting." "Let her play her game." "She's trying to undercut your voice before the gala," Julia added. Grant stood. "Then maybe we don't let her be the loudest one in the room." Later that afternoon, Grant invited Elena to join him for a meeting downtown at the Savannah Preservation Council. They were reviewing his proposed changes to the Westbrook project, and Elena, surprised but intrigued, agreed to go. As they stepped into the wood-paneled conference room, Elena noticed the change in Grant. He wasn't just present. He was focused, articulate, carrying himself with the calm authority of someone who had finally decided to care. "Not for show, not for approval, but for purpose." "Elena Brooks is my wife," he said during the meeting, turning slightly toward her. "She's been helping me think differently about what community means. I'd like her to speak." Every head turned. Elena felt her breath catch, but she stood smoothing the crease in her linen dress and stepped forward. "When we tear down what's old," she began, "we lose more than wood and nails. We lose stories, roots, spaces that shape the people who shape everything else." She paused, letting the words breathe. "Progress and preservation aren't enemies. They're partners if we let them be." A quiet fell over the room. Nods followed. One of the board members tapped her pen against her notebook and smiled. "Ms. Brooks, that was beautifully said." Grant watched Elena with something new in his eyes. Not admiration, not gratitude, something deeper. Something that looked a lot like wonder. After the meeting, as they walked down the sidewalk toward the car, Elena finally exhaled. "I don't know where that came from," she said, half laughing. "I do," Grant said. "It came from who you've always been." They stopped at the edge of the parking lot, sunlight casting long shadows behind them. "You keep surprising me," he added, voice quieter now. "I didn't think I could be led. But somehow you keep pulling me forward without making me feel like I've failed." She turned to him. "That's not what I'm trying to do." "I know." "And that's why it works." A beat passed. Their hands brushed. "Do you ever wonder," she said softly, "what this could have been if we'd met under different circumstances?" "All the time," he replied. "But we didn't." "No," he said. "We met like this, and maybe that's what made it real." That evening, back at the estate, Elena visited the East Wing again. The architecture room. She stood in front of the corkboard covered in his mother's sketches, then added one of her own, a simple pencil drawing of a small rural clinic wrapped in a porch with rocking chairs. Grant entered minutes later, watching her from the doorway. "You're making edits?" he asked, smiling. "I'm adding dreams," she said, pinning it beside his blueprint. He stepped closer. "Maybe we should dream out loud more often." "I think we're starting to." They stood together in the quiet, shoulder to shoulder, no masks between them. Elena glanced at him. "Are you scared of the gala?" "I'm not scared of the event," he said. "I'm scared of what it'll force us to name out loud." She nodded. Then maybe we decide what to name it, before anyone else does. He didn't speak. Instead, he took her hand, gently, without assumption, and for the first time she didn't pull away. She laced her fingers with his, like a bridge finally built between two people who had once stood on opposite sides of their own lives. The air inside Whitmore Manor buzzed with a quiet tension. Preparations for the gala had taken over the estate, florists buzzing in and out, catering teams arranging crystal glasses on silver trays, fabric swatches being matched to centerpieces in the ballroom. Every corner seemed manicured for perfection, yet beneath the polish, something frayed. Elena stood in the guest bedroom that had become her own, watching her reflection in the tall mirror. Julia had brought over 3 dresses, all floor-length, all elegant, but none of them felt like her. She ran her fingers along the neckline of a dark emerald gown and let out a slow breath. Behind her, Grant leaned against the doorframe, sleeves rolled up, expression unreadable. "You okay?" Elena met his eyes in the mirror. "You ever feel like the whole house is holding its breath?" "All the time," he said. She turned, arms crossed loosely over her chest. "Your father hasn't said a word to me since dinner 2 nights ago." Grant walked in, slow, calm. "He's waiting to see if you flinch." "I'm not going to," she said, voice steady but soft. "I know." He paused. "That's what scares him." Elena looked down, brushing a hand through her hair. "Grant, this gala... We agreed we wouldn't perform, but I need to know something before we step in front of everyone." He stilled. "Is this marriage still just a transaction to you?" Silence. The kind that tightens around the ribs. Then Grant stepped closer, eyes locked with hers. "No. It stopped being that the day you chose to stay when you didn't have to." Elena swallowed. "Then why haven't you said that before now?" "Because I'm still learning how to be honest without being afraid of what it costs." She nodded slowly, her throat tight. Grant reached for her hand. "Tomorrow's about a room full of people who think they know what legacy looks like, but I want to show them something they've never seen before." "And what's that?" "A marriage built on choice, not image." The words should have comforted her. And they did. Mostly. But there was something else. Something unsettled she couldn't quite name. The next afternoon, the estate transformed. Lanterns hung like soft stars across the lawn. The ballroom glowed gold with candlelight, and a string quartet played near the staircase. Guests arrived in tailored suits and silk gowns, floating through the space like pieces on a chessboard. Elena descended the stairs on Grant's arm, every head turning. Cameras flashed, whispers swirled. "She's stunning," someone murmured. "Is that her grandmother's quilt pattern on the dress lining?" another whispered. It was. Elena had requested it quietly. Just a subtle design hidden inside the folds. A thread of herself sewn into the fabric of someone else's world. Charles Whitmore approached near the bar, glass in hand, his gaze cool. "You've cleaned up nicely." Elena offered a neutral smile. "I didn't come here to decorate your brand, Mr. Whitmore." He tilted his head. "Then what did you come here for?" "To remind you that the people behind your fortune deserve more than silence and ceremony." Before he could respond, Grant stepped between them. "We're not doing this tonight." Charles lifted his brow. "You think she's ready for what comes after all this attention?" "She's more ready than I ever was." Elena watched the exchange like a distant observer. Something inside her shifted. The applause they were earning tonight didn't feel like affirmation. It felt like expectation. Heavy. Measured. Hours passed. Toasts were made, photos taken. Elena danced with donors and smiled for strangers who spoke her name like it was an accessory. Then, in the quiet corner of the ballroom, Fallon appeared, clad in silver. Sharp as ever. "I see you've learned how to blend in," she said, sipping champagne. Elena's jaw tightened. "I'm not blending in. I'm standing where I chose to," Fallon smirked. "Funny. I heard you only got that clinic deal because Grant sold off part of his trust. That's one expensive ribbon for a charity box." Elena froze. "What are you talking about?" Fallon raised her brows, feigning surprise. "Oh, you didn't know?" Elena stepped back slightly, heart beginning to pound. "You're lying." Fallon leaned in. "Ask your husband. See what part of your fairy tale is built on sand." Elena didn't respond. She walked away, calm on the outside, shaking inside. She found Grant by the veranda doors, half smiling at a guest before his eyes met hers. One look, and he knew. "Elena, you sold part of your trust?" she asked, voice low, private but fierce. "To fund the clinic?" He nodded slowly. "I did. I was going to tell you." "When?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I didn't want you to think this was pity. It's not. It was mine to give." She stepped back, wounded. "But you didn't tell me, and that's the part that matters." "Elena, no. We said this marriage would be honest. That we'd stop pretending." He reached for her, but she moved. "I need air." She turned and walked into the garden, heart thudding, eyes burning. Not from betrayal, but from the truth she hadn't seen coming. He had chosen her. But he had chosen for her, too. And now she didn't know what that meant for the life she was finally starting to believe in. The night air was warm, thick with gardenia and moonlight. But Elena felt cold. She sat on the edge of the stone fountain in the back garden, her gown pooled around her like velvet regret. The music from the ballroom echoed faintly in the distance. Distant laughter, clinking glasses. Applause that wasn't meant for her. Not tonight. She ran a hand through her hair and tried to breathe. Everything felt louder inside than outside. Footsteps approached, slow but certain. "Elena!" Grant's voice came behind her, low and careful. "Please don't walk away from me like that again." She didn't turn. "Then don't give me reasons to." Silence. He stepped closer, but not too close. "I didn't lie." "You didn't tell me the truth," she said, her voice sharp, then soft. "There's a difference." "I wasn't hiding it out of shame. I did it because I believe in what you're building. I wanted to help without making it about me." "And in doing that," she said, finally facing him, "you made a decision for me. You turned something I was proud of into something I didn't choose." Grant looked like he'd taken a hit to the chest. "That wasn't my intention. But it's what happened," she whispered. He ran a hand down his face, searching for the words. "You think I did this because I don't see your strength? I think you did it because part of you still believes I need saving." Grant looked down, the silence between them thick. "You changed me," he said, his voice cracking just slightly, "from the inside out. I didn't know I could care like this. Or want to be better. Not for image, for something real." She blinked, the ache behind her eyes swelling. "Then be real with me, not just generous, honest." He took a step forward. "I've made 1,000 mistakes in this house, most of them dressed as pride. But this, us, it's the one thing I don't want to mess up." Elena's eyes searched his face. "Then start by trusting me to carry the weight with you. I wasn't handed this life. I walked into it. On my own 2 feet." He nodded, slowly. "You're right." She turned back to the fountain, voice quieter now. "I've never had anything handed to me. Not love, not safety. I don't know how to accept something unless I've earned it." "You have earned it, Elena," he said, voice low but sure. "Everything." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back. After a long pause, he added, "Do you want me to pull the funding? If that's what it takes for this to be yours, I will." She turned to him, finally standing. "No, I want to keep the gift, but I need you to stop giving in silence." He took a breath, then extended his hand. Not forcefully, not assumingly. "Just open." She looked at it, then placed hers in his. And for the first time in a long time, they stood as equals in a place built on imbalance. Later that night, they sat on the porch steps, side by side. No music, no ballroom. Just two people finally willing to start again without pretending. "I was afraid," Grant said, "that if I didn't fix something, I'd lose you." "You were never supposed to fix me," Elena said. "Just stand beside me while I kept growing." He nodded, gaze steady. "Then let's grow something we both chose." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time since the gala began, the night finally felt quiet. Not empty, just still. Together. The morning after the gala felt like waking up in a different season. The air was quieter, softer. The house no longer hummed with footsteps and voices trying to impress. The grandeur had been cleared away, leaving only the bones of something simpler, something closer to real. Elena stood in the kitchen wearing one of Grant's button-down shirts and her own thoughts. She was stirring eggs with one hand, balancing her phone in the other, replying to messages from the clinic board. The sound of bare feet against tile broke her focus. Grant entered, still groggy, his hair a mess of waves and sleep. "You're up early." "I needed something ordinary," she said without looking up. He leaned against the counter and watched her. "You didn't sleep much." "No," she admitted. "Too many voices in my head." "Mine included?" She gave a slight smile. "Especially yours." He crossed to the fridge, pulled out orange juice, poured them both a glass. "Last night was a lot." "It was a mirror," Elena said, "and we both saw some things we weren't ready for." Grant nodded, taking a sip. "But we stayed." She met his eyes. "That matters." They ate breakfast at the island, not talking much, just sitting in a silence that felt like healing. Later, Elena visited Granny Ruth. The clinic was calm, filled with the scent of fresh linens and peppermint oil. Her grandmother looked stronger than she had in weeks, sitting upright, her Bible open on her lap, glasses low on her nose. "Well, if it isn't my gala girl," she teased as Elena walked in. Elena laughed, setting her bag down on the chair. "How'd you even hear about it?" "Julia sent me photos. Said you looked like Grace in green." Elena sat beside her. "It didn't feel graceful." Granny Ruth closed the Bible gently. "Sometimes grace is what comes after the shaking." Elena reached for her hand. "I almost ran." "I was so close." "But you didn't," her grandmother said. "You stood. You listened. You chose to speak with love, not pride. That's the difference." Elena laid her head against her grandmother's shoulder, like she used to when she was little. "I want this to work," she whispered. "But I need it to be ours, not everyone else's version of success." "Then stop waiting for permission," Granny Ruth said. "Start writing your own story, together." When Elena returned to the estate, Grant was on the back lawn, hands on his hips, staring at a section of land near the trees. "What are you looking at?" she asked, stepping beside him. "I think this is where we build it," he said. She followed his gaze. "The clinic?" He nodded. "A real one, on our land. With your team. A space where people feel like they matter the moment they walk in." Elena's heart tightened, not from fear, but from the sheer size of the possibility. "You're serious?" Grant turned to her. "I've never been more." She studied him. "We'll need permits, community input. The board's support. Then let's start all of it. Together." Elena reached for his hand. "You really believe we can do this?" "I believe in you," he said. "And I want to stand behind that belief every day we wake up under the same roof." For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, "I'll call the board tonight, but you're handling zoning." He grinned. "Deal." That evening they sat in the library, him sketching floor plans, her drafting emails, two people once strangers now building something side by side. The fire crackled softly. A song played low on the old record player in the corner. And somewhere between the quiet moments and shared glances, Elena realized she wasn't trying to survive this marriage anymore. She was learning how to live in it, not because it was perfect, but because they were finally writing it together. The early light filtered through the tall windows of the east wing, golden and quiet, stretching across the polished floors like a warm promise. Elena stood barefoot in the center of the design room, hands dusted with graphite, pinning her revised clinic layout next to Grant's latest sketch. Two visions now side by side, one soft and curved, the other precise and angular. Together they told a better story. She stepped back, eyes scanning the lines. "It's starting to look like home," she whispered to herself. Behind her, the door creaked open. "You're up early for someone who barely slept," Julia said, walking in with 2 mugs of coffee. "I couldn't stop thinking," Elena admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. "It feels like we're standing on the edge of something, and I want to be ready when it shifts." Julia leaned against the table. "I think you already shifted. The rest is just catching up." Elena smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Julia studied her. "What is it?" Elena hesitated, then set the coffee down. "Fallon texted me this morning." That caught Julia off guard. "Fallon? Since when does she text instead of just showing up?" "She said she's in town. Wants to meet just me." Julia arched a brow. "You think she's here to apologize?" "No," Elena said. "But maybe she's here to explain." Later that afternoon, Elena met Fallon at a small cafe downtown, tucked between a used bookstore and a florist. It was the kind of place they used to walk past when they were kids, pressing their noses to the glass but never going in. Fallon was already seated, her sunglasses resting on the table, her posture a little too perfect. Her eyes tracked Elena's every move as she approached. "You came," Fallon said, folding her hands neatly. "You asked," Elena replied, sliding into the seat across from her. A long pause stretched between them. "I owe you something," Fallon finally said. "Not an apology. I'm not there yet." "But an explanation." Elena didn't interrupt. Fallon took a slow breath. "I resented you. For being the one who stayed quiet, who kept her head down, who didn't ask for attention, but got it anyway." "I didn't get anything," Elena said gently. "I worked, I sacrificed, I endured." "I know that now," Fallon admitted. "Back then, I only saw what I was missing. And when I saw you walk into the Whitmore world like you belonged, it shook something in me. I thought it was jealousy. But I think it was fear." Elena tilted her head. "Fear of what?" That you were becoming something I never figured out how to be, Fallon said. Authentic. The word hung there for a moment. I can't undo how I treated you, Fallon continued, but I can try to stop carrying that bitterness forward. Elena didn't respond right away. Then, softly, maybe the real difference between us wasn't attention. It was what we were willing to do for it. Fallon nodded. And what we were willing to give up. When they parted, there were no tears, no dramatic reconciliations, just a small nod. A mutual release. Back at the estate, Grant was in the garden, reviewing permits with a clipboard tucked under one arm. He looked up as Elena approached. You okay? He asked. She nodded. I met with Fallon. His expression tightened slightly, but he said nothing. She's not ready to be different, but she's trying to understand why she needs to be. Grant studied her. And how do you feel? Lighter, Elena said. Like I stopped dragging her shadow behind me. He smiled. Good. You deserve light. She stepped closer, voice quiet. You helped me find it. He leaned in, forehead resting lightly against hers. And you helped me believe I could hold on to it. As the sun dipped behind the trees, they stood in the golden hush of the garden. Two people who had learned, through missteps, mistakes, and silence, how to speak with honesty. The soil had been hard, the roots messy, but something was finally blooming, and this time it wasn't just survival. It was choice, it was growth, it was love, unpolished, unexpected, and finally, theirs. The morning of the Foundation's community announcement began with rain, light and steady, drumming softly on the estate's roof like a calm warning. Elena stood at the window, arms wrapped around herself, watching the mist roll over the hedges. For once, she didn't see the house. She saw the land, the possibility. Behind her, Grant adjusted his tie, catching her reflection in the glass. You ready? He asked. She turned, a quiet breath leaving her lips. I don't know if I'm ever really ready. But I am willing. He stepped closer, smoothing a small crease in her sleeve. That's always been the difference with you. Elena gave him a faint smile, then glanced down at the folder in her hand. The speech she'd rewritten at least 5 times. She hadn't planned to speak at the event. But when Julia suggested the community would rather hear from someone with heart than someone with polish, Elena knew it had to be her. The tent had been set up on the back lawn, just beyond the magnolia trees. Dozens of folding chairs faced a small stage. People from all corners of the city were already arriving. Local nurses, clinic volunteers, preservation board members, even a few faces from the neighborhood she'd grown up in. Charles Whitmore, of course, was already seated in the front row, his face unreadable. Julia stood backstage beside Elena, holding a clipboard and watching the crowd gather. You know you don't have to convince them, she said softly. I know, Elena replied, but I want to remind them why this matters. Why it's not just a building. Julia smiled, squeezing her shoulder gently. Then speak like you're telling a story to someone who almost gave up on dreaming. When Elena stepped onto the stage, the air felt thick, but not heavy. The clouds had begun to lift, revealing patches of soft light breaking through. She looked out at the crowd, then at the sketch of the clinic behind her, printed large for everyone to see. The lines weren't just blueprints anymore. They were chapters. I was never supposed to be here, she began, voice steady. Not in this dress, not on this land, not in this family. I came from a home where survival was measured by quiet sacrifices and unsent letters. She paused, eyes finding Granny Ruth in the third row, wrapped in her favorite shawl, beaming with quiet pride. I didn't marry into this life with dreams of owning it. I came to preserve something else: dignity, hope, memory. And this clinic, this space, is not about legacy. It's about access. It's about the kind of care that listens before it speaks. A few people leaned forward. Others nodded slowly. "My name is Elena Brooks Whitmore," she continued, letting the name settle like a vow, not a title. "And I want to build something that outlives applause." That serves quietly. That stands as proof that two very different lives can come together and make something better than either imagined alone. She stepped back as a quiet wave of applause broke through the tent. It wasn't thunderous. It was thoughtful, earned. Grant took the mic next, his words brief, heartfelt. When they stood side by side afterward, a photographer asked for a picture. They didn't pose. They just looked at each other. And for once, the flash didn't matter. Back at the house, as the sky cleared, Charles found Grant alone in the library, sipping a glass of water by the window. "She's changed this place," Charles said, voice low. Grant didn't turn. "She's changed me." Charles hesitated. "I spent a long time building a name. But she's the first person I've seen give it meaning." Grant looked over, surprise flickering across his face. "I don't say that lightly," Charles added, "but you'd be a fool not to protect what you've built with her." Grant nodded, something unspoken passing between father and son. That night, Elena wandered into the design room again. The lights were off, the windows open. A soft breeze lifted the edges of the sketches still pinned to the wall. She found Grant sitting on the bench beneath the window, a notebook in his lap. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Didn't want to," he said. "Not tonight." She crossed to him slowly, settling beside him. For a while they just sat, listening to the wind and the crickets beyond the glass. Then, without prompting, Grant opened the notebook and handed it to her. Inside was a letter, in his handwriting. To the woman who made the silence worth breaking. Elena read the first few lines, then stopped, eyes misting. "You wrote this for me?" "I've been writing it for months," he said, "but I only just found the right ending." She leaned against him, folding the letter into her chest, like a secret she'd waited her whole life to hear. "I think," she whispered, "we're starting to write the rest of the story." He kissed the top of her head, softly. "And this time," he said, "we're writing it together." A year later, the house no longer echoed with hollow footsteps or conversations meant to impress. It breathed now, doors open, light pouring in, windows never locked. The sound of laughter carried through the halls, mixed with the faint hum of Grant's pencil scratching across a page, and Elena's quiet voice reading aloud from the morning news. On the porch, rocking chairs creaked slowly. The breeze smelled of cut grass and honeysuckle. And nestled in Elena's arms, wrapped in the quilt Granny Ruth had stitched years ago, was a baby girl with Grant's eyes and Elena's steady brow. Ruthie. She stirred in her sleep, one tiny hand curling around her mother's finger. Elena glanced down and smiled. "She dreams like you," she whispered. Grant stepped onto the porch with 2 mugs of coffee, his tie half done, shoes still untied. "She dreams like you," he said, setting the mugs down. "Peaceful, but probably planning something." "She already has your attitude," Elena added, raising an eyebrow. Grant sank into the chair beside her. "You say that like it's a bad thing." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "It's a dangerous thing. We're in trouble." They watched the morning unfold together, wrapped in the quiet, rhythmic peace of a life they never planned, but chose every day. The clinic was already open, run by a small but mighty team. Elena still volunteered twice a week. Grant had finished renovating 2 community homes with his architecture students. Even Charles, now quieter and oddly sentimental, had started bringing Ruthie fresh magnolia blooms every Sunday afternoon. "Remember when we used to sit here and barely speak?" Elena asked softly. "I remember," Grant said. "I remember thinking the silence was safer." She turned toward him. "And now I know the right words were just waiting to be earned." Ruthie stirred, and Elena rocked her gently, humming something slow and familiar. A tune Granny Ruth used to sing under her breath while folding laundry or cooking cornbread, always off-key, but full of comfort. "She's going to grow up knowing what it means to be loved without conditions," Elena said. "Not because we're perfect, but because we fought to be present." Grant reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "I still don't know how I got here." "You stopped running." He looked out at the land, at the garden they'd planted that now bloomed in scattered bursts of marigolds and rosemary. "I didn't know what I wanted back then. Only what I didn't want." "And now?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. "Now I want everything I thought I didn't deserve." The front door creaked open behind them. Julia stepped out, sunglasses on, holding 2 envelopes. "You 2 might want to open these," she said, handing one to each of them. "The mayor's office just approved the grant for Phase 2 of the clinic. And the Preservation Society awarded your design grant. Community Heritage Award." Grant blinked. "Seriously?" Julia smiled. "Seriously. Looks like building with heart finally caught someone's attention." She disappeared inside, leaving them stunned, their hands full of letters and hearts full of something heavier than pride. Gratitude. Elena opened the envelope slowly, then laughed softly. "Granny always said purpose grows slow like old trees. And now we've got roots," Grant said. He looked at her, then at Ruthie. "You think she'll know?" he asked. "What it took to get here." Elena met his gaze. "We won't have to tell her. She'll feel it in the way we hold her. The way we stay." He reached for her hand, curling his fingers around hers, grounding himself. Inside the house, a wind chime sang as the breeze moved through the hallway windows. It wasn't a grand sound. Just a soft reminder that things once broken could find harmony again. Ruthie's eyes opened slowly, blinking against the light. Elena smiled down at her. "Good morning, baby girl." Grant leaned in and kissed her tiny forehead. "Welcome home." And in that quiet moment, on a porch that once held 2 strangers, they sat as a family. No contracts, no performances, just 2 people who had chosen love the hard way, and a new life born from everything they'd learned along the way. Not perfect, but entirely real and deeply, deeply enough. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way.